This episode is brought to you by Squarespace, where website design is made easy. What is going on, freaks and geeks? My name is John Solo, and today we're all going to learn a valuable lesson about the consequences of flying too high, both literally and metaphorically. If you're a big fan of mythology, then chances are you've heard about the tragedy of Icarus, the young man whose ambition and recklessness led to him challenging the gods and, as a result, falling from the heavens to an untimely and brutal death. His story exists as a painful reminder that no matter how much we accomplish in this life, and no matter how empowered that makes us feel, at the end of the day, we're all still human and as vulnerable as anyone else. Pretty intense way to start this episode, huh? Forgive me, it's just a pretty intense story, but like most Greek myths, it has its fair share of hilarious and, for lack of a better term, what the fuck moments. I'm talking nepotocide, a word I had to look up before writing it in this script, bestiality, and good old-fashioned child sacrifice. I guess what I'm really trying to say is it has all the fundamentals of a good story, or a Game of Thrones spinoff. I'm telling ya, even if you've heard a summary of Icarus' story and think you know the gist, there is no way you can predict what happens in the original myth. And with that in mind, I say we just jump into it. As always, make sure you hit that like button to help us reach our goal of 5 whole likes. Crazy, I know. Subscribe to have more mythological content delivered to your sub box on a regular basis, and most importantly, enjoy. Now, before we get into the meat of Icarus' story, we have to break down some of the insane events leading up to it, starting with a guy named Minos. Minos was the son of Zeus and was raised alongside his two brothers by King Asterion, the king of Crete. When Asterion died, the kingdom was left with the question of which of his sons would take his place, and Minos insisted that it was the god's will that he become king, and to prove it, he said that whatever he prayed for would come true. At the time, he was just talking out of his ass, but later that same day, he made a sacrifice to Poseidon and said, "If you can help me convince these simpletons that I'm supposed to be king, I'll make an even larger sacrifice to you the second that shiny crown is on my head." So Poseidon, now having something to gain from the situation, decided to help his nephew out. Just when the wannabe king had a big crowd gathered around him, he gave the water god the signal and a giant white bull emerged from the sea. But guess what? After getting exactly what he wanted, Minos went back on his word. Instead of sacrificing the great white bull, he sacrificed some regular, everyday, shitty bulls. Poseidon was furious at Minos' betrayal, so to get back at him, he cursed that great white bull with uncontainable madness, forcing Minos to let it roam free in the wild where it was a danger to his citizens. Funnily enough, we actually talked about that same bull in my episode about the 12 labors of Heracles because he captures it for his 7th labor. Anyway, it wasn't enough for Poseidon that the bull be both angry and on the loose, so he cursed Minos' wife to fall in love with it. And at this point, we should all know what fall in love really means in Greek mythology. She wanted to have sex with it. Obviously, the physics involved in this endeavor were not easy to figure out, so she had to recruit the talents of master craftsman Daedalus, or Daedalus, Icarus' dad, to find a way to make it work. Now, there's actually a story behind how Daedalus, who's an Athenian, ended up in Crete. See, he was the most respected craftsman in his homeland, and, wanting to pass on his knowledge, took his nephew Perdix as an apprentice. Only Perdix made the mistake of showing too much potential, so Daedalus got jealous and tossed him off a cliff, and that led to him being banished from Athens. Over in Crete, he put that brilliant mind to work for Minos' wife and made a wooden mechanical bowl that she could sit inside of to make the Cretan bull think it was real. Then the bull, which didn't exactly have the highest standards, mounted her, and a few months later, she gave birth to his son Asterius. Asterius, better known as the Minotaur, was human from the neck down, but had the head of a bull and was the bane of Minos' existence. Not only was it his wife's love child with a wild animal, but it would often attack and eat the Cretan citizens, so Minos had to put a stop to it. Following the advice of an oracle, he hired Daedalus to build a massive labyrinth to trap the Minotaur. According to Homeric texts, that labyrinth was one long, winding path that led to the center, but later poets like Ovid described it as an impossible maze of tunnels with passages that connected to each other in multiple places so that both the beginning and end were impossible to find. And not just impossible for the Minotaur, but also the child sacrifices that were fed to him and Daedalus himself, but more on that in a little bit. Let's talk about the child sacrifices first, because who wouldn't want to talk about that? See, around the time the Minotaur was captured, Minos' son was killed in Athens while participating in some Olympic-style games. And as payback, Minos demanded that once a year he be given 7 of the city's most courageous boys and 7 of their most beautiful girls, otherwise he'd destroy Athens with his naval fleet. Not really seeing a choice in the matter, the Athenian king Aegeus agreed to these shitty terms, and once a year he'd send 14 unknowing children to Crete on a ship with black sails. This exchange went on for a couple years, but on the 3rd year, the Athenian king son Theseus volunteered in place of one of the slaves with the intention of killing the Minotaur and freeing the kingdom of their burden. Then, after arriving in Crete, he met King Minos' daughter, who immediately fell in love with his luscious head of hair and chiseled jawline. She wanted to ensure that he survived the labyrinth, so she sought out Daedalus for advice, and he gave her a ball of yarn that would allow Theseus to retrace his steps and find his way out after killing the Minotaur. So Theseus enters the labyrinth, ties the piece of yarn to the door, then makes his way to the center where he finds the Minotaur sleeping. He then pulls out the sword that he managed to smuggle in there, but the Minotaur wakes up after hearing this and the two start to duke it out. Depending on the version, Theseus either stabs the Minotaur in the throat or puts him in a chokehold and strangles him. But regardless of which one you prefer, both end with him cutting off the Minotaur's head and leading the Athenian children to safety. But if you're thinking this adventure has a happy ending, you're wrong. Because before leaving home, Theseus told his father that if his ship returned with white sails, he was successful, and if it returned with black sails, it meant he was killed. Well, with all the excitement going on, Theseus forgot to change the sails, so when he pulled up to Athens, his father saw they were black, and being stricken with grief, he threw himself off a cliff. But hey, at least the body of water he died in was named after him, right? So now that we've covered the entire backstory, it's time for us to break down Icarus' flight and fall, starting with he and his father being imprisoned by King Minos. Once again, there's a few different versions of how this goes down. In one version, Minos was furious at Daedalus for helping Theseus kill the Minotaur and relieving Athens of their burdens, so he punished the craftsman by locking up him and his son. In another, Minos imprisoned him immediately after the labyrinth was finished so he couldn't reveal its secrets to anyone. And in my favorite version, Minos eventually finds out that Daedalus is the one who helped his wife have sex with a Cretan bull and is like, dude, what the hell? Then locks him up. There's also two possibilities for where Minos chose to imprison them. Some say in a tower, and some sources say in the very labyrinth he designed. Regardless of which one you prefer, Daedalus wasn't a fan of either and wanted to escape as soon as possible. The problem was, even if they did manage to break out of the prison, Minos had total control over all land and sea routes out of Crete, so there was no way for them to escape the city. Or at least that's what he thought at first. Daedalus was struck by inspiration when he saw some birds flying over their head and realized they might be able to fly out of there. In the words of Ovid, he turned his mind to arts unknown and nature unrevealed and started crafting wings out of feathers from the birds that would perch on the prison, wax from candles, and thread. There's also a funny line by Ovid that says Icarus didn't do anything but slow the process down because he kept fiddling with the feathers and glue. When the wings were finally complete, Daedalus had some words of warning for Icarus. He said to avoid flying too high because the rising heat could melt the wax in his wings, and don't fly too low because the moisture from the ocean could dampen and weigh down his wings. Then the two of them took flight. They soared through the air as gracefully as one of Casey Neistat's drones, but then Icarus started to lose himself in the excitement. Feeling empowered and invincible, he continued to ascend towards the heavens, which the gods didn't like very much. One thing to keep in mind is that Icarus and Daedalus were the first two people to ever fly, and up to this point, that specific activity was reserved for the birds and gods who didn't like them encroaching on their territory. The gods, that is. I don't think the birds cared very much. You could interpret what happens next as an act of science or an act of Helios, but either way, it wasn't long before the heat became too much for the wax. Icarus's feathers started to clump together and fall off so that he was left flapping his bare arms. Then he began his rapid descent towards Gaia. He tried to call out to his father for help, but he crashed into the ocean before Daedalus could even react. And when he did look back, all he saw was the remains of Icarus's wings floating on the water. Eventually, he found Icarus's body washed up on an island and buried him there. That island is now called Icaria, and the body of water he fell into is known as the Icarian Sea. So apparently in ancient Greece, if you want something named after you, all you have to do is die tragically on it. Sounds easy enough. Now there's a few ways that we can interpret Icarus' story. On the positive side, we can find hope and inspiration. Whether you're trapped in a situation that appears to have no escape, or you're pursuing a creative art, you can look at these two men flying freely through the air and be reminded that no matter how the odds are stacked against you, there is a way for you to accomplish your goals. But then you've got to think about the negative implications of Icarus' fall. Your boy had a taste of success and got carried away, or should I say was swatted down, when he tried to push his luck. Many interpret this as a warning to all, but especially to reckless youth like Icarus, that you shouldn't try achieving too much too fast, because if you don't have the proper knowledge and tools, you could fall down even faster than you rose up. But as some of you may have noticed, this message only applies to half of Daedalus' warning, don't fly too close to the sun. And we're left to wonder if there's also a meaning behind his advice to avoid flying too close to the ocean. Well, one possible explanation that I love is that the vast and deep ocean may represent human emotion. So when Daedalus says the wings may take on moisture and Icarus could be weighed down, the lesson is to not put too much emphasis on your feelings or you'll end up drowning in them. When making decisions about the path forward, you have to find a balance somewhere between your ambitions and goals and your feelings. You can't listen to only one of them. For example, let's switch out Icarus for an entrepreneur type character who's trying to hustle and achieve as much as he can. If he only considers how he feels, then he may pass up an exciting opportunity for an emotional reason like fear, and therefore never end up leaving the ground, or in Icarus's case, making an escape. But if he only takes his ambition into account, then he may not evaluate the risks of his decision properly. And while he may enjoy the excitement of flying high, he'll wind up crashing and drowning in a pit of despair when it fails, like Icarus. Anyway, I'm sure some of you are curious about what happened to Daedalus after he buried Icarus. Well, he continued to travel west away from Crete and landed in Sicily, where King Cocalus, or King Cocalus, welcomed him with open arms. Meanwhile, the furious King Minos was on the hunt for Daedalus, visiting every surrounding kingdom and presenting a riddle that he knew only Daedalus could solve to figure out who was housing him. He challenged each king to put a piece of string through a spiral seashell, and none could do it until King Cocalus. He gave the items to Daedalus, who tied the string to an ant and lured it through the shell with a drop of honey. Then after Cocalus showed Minos he was successful, the Cretan king demanded Daedalus be brought to him. But somehow Cocalus convinces Minos that he should take a bath before seeing him. Maybe he looked a little too grimy after all his sailing. I don't know. As illogical as it seems, Minos takes a dip in the tub, then, depending on the rendition, either Cocalus' daughters or Daedalus himself pours boiling water on the king, killing him. Which I think is a fitting punishment for someone who fed almost 30 children to a minotaur, but you might disagree. Regardless, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this myth, and not just what happened in it, but also the lesson it's supposed to teach us. And while you're doing that, let me tell you about this week's sponsor. So Daedalus may have been a master craftsman, but you know what he did have trouble building? Websites. The experts say that's because there was no internet in ancient Greece, but personally, I think it's because there was no Squarespace. Because from websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the best platform you can use to build your web presence and run your business. Not only do they have a huge variety of templates to get you started, but every single one you can use for virtually any purpose. Whether you're starting a blog, selling merchandise, or showing off your art in a gallery, all you have to worry about is what look represents you best. Not only that, but you can also buy domains through Squarespace so your website can have the URL you always dreamed of, and they automatically generate mobile versions of your site so your fans and customers can still access it on their phone. At this point, it's no secret that I love and trust Squarespace so much that I use them to host my own website, the one and only messeduporigins.com. It's here that you can find links to playlists, purchase my favorite books for studying myths and fairy tales, visit my merch store, and check out the art the SoloFam has made for the show. If I can set all that up with only making one call to their award-winning customer service, then you can too. So if you want to try them out for yourself, just go to squarespace.com/JohnSolo and save 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain by using code JohnSolo at checkout. And on that note, we're going to bring this episode to a close. As always, thank you so much for watching, especially those who come back every week to hit that like button. Speaking of, if you haven't yet, make sure you drop a like and subscribe if you want more messed up mythology delivered to your sub box on a regular basis. And of course, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to stay updated on channel news, get hints about upcoming topics, and send me suggestions for future episodes. Unfortunately, my son Gunther isn't with us today. He's spending a relaxing afternoon with his grandma instead, but go follow him on Instagram. I'd never say it to his face, but he's pretty damn cute, so if you want some extra laughs and smiles when flipping through your timeline, then I'd say give him a follow. I'll see you guys next week with another episode of Mythology Explained and a very special video where Lauren and I react to my old content. Yes, it's going to be hilarious and painful for everyone involved, so make sure you check it out. Until that day comes though, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.